your participation in today's gathering. I'd particularly like to welcome His Excellency Archbishop Balestrero, Nuncio of the Holy See to the UN Geneva, and to the representatives from the Brazilian mission. A large thank you also goes to the co-sponsors of this event, the Geneva Environmental Network, the Congregation of Our Lady of the Good Shepherd, Dominicans for Justice and Peace, Viva International, the Swiss Catholic Lenten Campaign, and Edmund Rice International. In view of past and current environmental destruction and non-economic loss and damages, we as faith-based advocates are called to be pilgrims of hope. Through dialogue and encounter, we reach out and speak up about just transition and the legal responsibility of states to counteract climate change. As we begin today, I thank you all in advance for your contributions to our discussion, and especially as we move towards COP30 in November. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Welcome, everybody. My name is Bernd Nilles. I'm the director of the Swiss Catholic Lenten Fund and president of CITSE, which is the International Alliance of Catholic Development Agencies. I'm very happy to have here with me, already mentioned, Archbishop Balestrero. Nice to meet you again after some years. Warm welcome also to Father Rodrigo, who came from Brazil and who works closely with the church there, but also with social movements, indigenous peoples, and will bring some insights from Brazil. And warm welcome to Elena Cedillo, who works for the Lutheran World Federation on climate justice. Warm welcome. I had been asked to make a little introduction framing of this event. I will do now. After that, we will have some inputs from our guests and followed by a conversation. And of course, you will also be able to raise questions or make comments at a later stage. I think we all see and are very aware of the escalating climate crisis. It's not anymore only an issue for the Global South. It's also very much felt more and more also by northern societies. We see not only bad things, we also see some very important developments. For example, on climate mitigation, we see an increasing amount of court cases at the national, at the regional, but also at the international level, with the most important advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice that clarified the obligation of states to act on climate change and clarified clearly their duties, something that also had been enforced at the regional level, like by the Human Rights Court in the European Court in Strasbourg. We are also here on the eve of the United Nations General Assembly, where thanks to the United Nations Secretary General Guterres, we will have a high-level event on the 24th of September, where heads of states are asked to raise their climate ambition and to deliver stronger NDCs, because the Secretary General is very much concerned about the so far weak commitments. This is also because a few days later, we are expected to see the next synthesis report, which will calculate all the NDCs together and will tell us on what path to what kind of temperature we are aiming at. The last time, I think, was 2.7 degrees, and I'm not sure if we are getting really better. We'll see. We are also, as Blair already mentioned, on the eve of COP30, which will take place in November. A crucial moment, of course, to raise climate ambition, and a very particular event because it takes place in the Amazon region. So we will also see major mobilization of civil society, indigenous people, in the context of the so-called People Summit, which is not often taking place parallel to an official negotiation that we will have such a big, important alternative summit. which will deliver its own responses to the climate crisis and will probably challenge also governments. One issue at stake today here in this session, but also later, I think at 1 o'clock in another official side event, we will talk about just transition, because we all know and we can imagine that changing from a carbon economy to a low or zero carbon economy brings tremendous changes for people and societies and economies with it. So here human rights come into play, because some of the solutions also proposed to overcome the climate crisis affect human rights. And of course, we want to see the transition to low carbon economies based on a human rights approach. Human rights are also important, and we can discuss it later, because not everybody is affected the same way by the climate crisis. We have, for example, in particularly women and girls, for example, tremendously affected by climate disasters. That's why also at the United Nations climate negotiations, there is an agenda to have better gender-sensitive policies which aim to help particularly vulnerable groups like women and girls to survive the climate crisis. We have important decisions here at the Human Rights Council. We saw the important report of the UN Special Rapporteur on Climate Change on the so-called defossilization of our economies. We saw the important United Nations Secretary General report yesterday on the just transition and human rights, where he identified some solutions and barriers. And we will hear later also from statements how Catholic representatives look at this. And we have, and that's also one reason why we are here today, a strong call from the Global South. We have a new statement from the bishops' conferences from Africa, Asia, and Latin America, who raise their voice with an urgent call to all governments to take action on climate change and to radically transform our global economic system to prioritize people and the planet. Finally, we are also on the eve of probably, I hope, Pope Leo's first climate speech coming on 1st of October in Castel Gandolfo. We are all very excited and look forward to this very important moment, because it might give us also an idea about, and hope you have, of course, the nuncio with us, to get a better idea on the role of the Holy See in the next years in the climate negotiations that actually could even come from Catholic NGOs like mine. The Brazilian COP presidency has framed the COP in Brazil as an ethical stocktake. So it's not only a stocktake about counting CO2 emissions, they want to see an ethical stocktake. And interestingly, the presidency makes reference in this to Laudato Si, and is mentioning a Catholic encyclical in their communication. I think this was a second letter to all governments participating at the COP. So you see, we are at a crucial moment. We have some strong voices. We have progress in different areas. The only progress we did not see so far is in reducing CO2 emissions. That is the only problem we have. So I really look forward to our guests, how they look at the opportunities, but also the flaws of our today's situation and reality. And we start, of course, with a perspective from the Global South. And I would like to invite Father Rodrigo to give us his perspective first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bernd, Your Excellency, Balestrero, and others participant here. It's really important for us to reflect on this document, a call for justice and our common home, ecological conversion, transformation, and resistance to false solutions. This is not only a statement, but a prophetic voice rising from the grassroots, from the wounds of people and territories, and now taken up by the bishops of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and the Caribbean. Together, they place before the world, and especially before government leaders in face of COP30 and their representatives the urgency of climate justice, the defense of human dignity, and the recognition of the rights of nature in the service of people and planet. So the call begins with a clear view. We are living through a climate collapse. It's no longer a matter of projections. It's concrete reality, disproportionately affecting the poorest populations, traditional communities, indigenous people, quilombolas, small farmers, hitting women on a very specific way, people from the peripheries. Yet the wounds of this crisis are not only social, they are also ecological wounds inflicted on forests, rivers, soils, oceans, biodiversities, and on the very fabric of life. Creation itself groans on the way of an economic model that places profit above life, reducing both people and nature's disposable communities. So we have Laudato Si, we have Laudato Deo, and Pope Leo XIV remind us the exploitation of the earth, resources, and marginalization of the poor are two faces of the same violence. So these are some specific. So the cry of the poor and the cry of the planet, as Pope Francis used to say in Laudato Si, make us to recognize the intrinsic value of the dignity of the human being, but also of all creation. So some aspects important of the document. At the same time, the text affirms of hope inspired by the legacy of the church social teaching and the struggles of communities. It recalls that our vocation is to link ecological conversion, climate justice, and the recognition of the rights of nature as indispensable conditions for sustaining life and building peace. So on the strengths of this appeal lies in unmasking the false solutions now being presented as responses to the crisis, the so-called green economy, the financialization, monetization of nature, carbon markets, and mining in the name of energy, digital, and military transitions. None of these heals the wounds of creation. On the contrary, they deepen inequality, destroy forests and waters, violate rights of nature and of peoples, and perpetuate logic of sacrifice zones around the world where life is exchanged for profit. So politically, the call is concrete. Reparations of the ecological and climate debt owed by the North to the South, adequate and unconditional financing for adaptation, but remember, adaptation is not sufficient if we don't go to the causes of what's happening, loss and damages funds, and truly participatory process where affected communities and nature itself, through its defenders, have a real voice, especially on a time where the multilateralism is under threat. You need to have a multilateralism like Pope Francis used to say in Laudato Deo that comes from the bottom to up. So ecclesially, the call is equally clear: to live ecological conversion, to walk with the poor and the planet, and to embody justice, peace, and prophetic courage. From a prophetic perspective, the appeal reclaims the fundamental tradition of the church to defend the sanctity of life, human and non-human alike. Of course, as Franciscan, I have to remember, we are celebrating the 800 years of the Canticle of the Creators, where we are all interrelated. We are a family, brother, sister, mother. So, and this tells us the importance of the dignity and the rights of the nation, of the nature. So, COP30 must not be just another conference. The document thinks and invites to be a turning point. The voice of the United Global South rises here in this document, not only as a denunciation, but also announcing resistance, care, and hope. Of course, echoing in the Amazon, but also in Africa and also in Asia, in lands scarred by mining and monoculture, but also in rivers that are defended as legal persons, in forests that sustain breath and climate, and in experiences of agroecology, communities, different economies, economy of Francis, economy of life, that World Council of Churches used to talk, and solidarity. So the echoes that come from the territories are extremely important, from the communities, from the traditional groups, from the indigenous groups. We have some examples, and I close in a few. By the end of October 22, 24, 25, there will be a gathering in Bolivia of the so-called municipalities, agroecological municipalities free from mining. So it's to show that, of course, we're not going to live in a world without extraction. But what kind of extraction? So that's why the document insists in the perspective of transformation. The transformation, from our perspective, it's ecological conversion. So to face the issues, try to go to the cause, to think on a world post-extractivist in terms of one type of transition from this predatory system to a more regulated system, and then what is essential to go to what is really necessary in terms of surviving. This has to do with style of life, with the system. So the document's very comprehensive and help us to think about post-COP. Because I think the results of COP are important, but we need to keep people connected. We need to keep our people connected. So just to finish, in the Brazilian church, we organized the country in 5 big regions. We already finished all the so-called, the name is a little bit ambitious, is the pre-COPs. So those pre-COPs happened. And now we're already thinking in the follow-up of these pre-COPs. There was a way formative for the people to understand that the country is receiving the COP, and not thinking this is going to be a discussion only about Brazil, but this is a world issue. But how can we continue in this way? And the church committed with all this approach from the perspective of our social teaching. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father. Maybe one follow-up question. Since you organized all these pre-COPs all over the country, and I guess you were listening to many statements, what would you say are the 1-2 key messages from local communities, indigenous communities, when they look at this international summit, this climate COP? What is really beyond the statement from the bishops? What do you hear from people on the ground? What are they hoping for? What's the urgency?
There is an immediate need that especially indigenous people talking about the recognition of their traditional lands. This is very strong, and to open space for their experiences that are already happening in terms of alternatives. So this is one. The other one is how can we together start to discuss and bring, especially in urban areas, this was very strong with the youth, and in urban areas, how we raise these concerns, and how can we build different cities? How can we live in different perspectives? Of course, it tackles some issues. Brazilian government really opened in the direction of a different approach for human rights and also for the environment. But to govern is not easy, and there's a lot of contradictions also. And I will just want to highlight one aspect that is very important from my perspective, but I think from our perspective, when you talk about decarbonization and when you talk about the carbon credits in the so-called consensus of decarbonization. When we when we don't reflect this issue of monetizing and financialization of nature, putting price on the photosynthesis and make it into the markets, we are paying the communities who live in that place to do what they for millennia used to do. You're affecting directly the ancestrality, spirituality, and the culture, the values of the people. And I was in another discussion here, I was talking about the governor of Pará, was last year in the US, I think it was during the New York Climate Week, and he was selling those carbon credits. And together was two groups, indigenous groups and Quilombolas group. You know, of course they won, because it means they will receive something. But this comes from this idea that the nature accomplishes the vital forces of life. It's a service, and we must pay for them. But they make part, they are integrated, they make part of our life. So we're changing even the way to look to the things as values. So it's not it's not only a technical issue. It's a profound issue that each one has a collaboration and something to say.
Very much. Archbishop, yeah, curious to see how the Holy See looks at this challenge and transition.
Thank you very much. I will be happy to share some ideas. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks to all those who participate in this very timely event. And this event, which takes place during as we know, the 60th session of the Human Rights Council, and also just a few months after the landmark agreement, which took place in Sevilla, on financing for development, and also a couple of months before COP30, which will return to Brazil, after 30 years Brazil had hosted the Earth Summit, and which takes place, this event, few days before the Pope, as has just been mentioned in the vote at the beginning, in Castel Gandolfo, will take the floor and will say his word on this very timely issue. Now, I want to share with you a secret, but keep it confidential. He did not tell me what he's going to say. So I don't really know what he's going to say, but what I am sure, and that I am moving along his mindset and along the mindset of the church, is that we are in the Jubilee year. And the Jubilee year, is going under the themes Pilgrims of Hope, which invites us, I would say, to reflect on timeless issues such as equity, justice, mercy, and also what is the shared destiny of all humanity. In this sense, I would like to reflect on one word which is evoked precisely in the theme for the Jubilee year, Pilgrims of Hope. Hope is an English word which comes from a Latin, which is spes in Latin. And in its turn, the Latin word spes comes from another word, a Sanskrit, well, or better, it has a Sanskrit root. And this root is spa, which means to strive for a goal. So the power of this expression, the seeds of hope, which is what the Pope had just said in his message for the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. He invited everyone to be seed of hope. This word hope lies in the fact that the seeds are the very embodiment of hope. They are surrounded by darkness, they look up, they strive for a goal, they act, and eventually they flourish and they blossom. So we too are called to be seeds of hope, to strive for a goal, to look up, to act and eventually to flourish, even if we are for sure surrounded by a very troubled reality, and we are faced by very pressing challenges which stem from the climate crisis, which directly touches upon the dignity, upon the rights of everyone, and goes to justice issues. And about this, I would like really also to recapture what has recently been pointed out by the World Meteorological Organization, which is another organization which has its seat here in Geneva. And it has shown how climate change and its effects are already negatively impacting the enjoyment of human rights across the whole globe. The World Meteorological Organization has noted that extreme weather events in the past 50 years accounted for over 2 million deaths worldwide. This is an average of 110 deaths every single day. And this is not the whole story, because climate change does not affect in the same way all the countries. 91% of those 2 million deaths have occurred in developing countries. They have not occurred in Switzerland. They have not occurred in France. So countries with inherent vulnerabilities, although they have contributed the least to climate change, they suffer the most from its consequences. From the rising sea levels that threaten to permanently displace entire communities, to extreme weather events that bring unprecedented destruction, those affected face unparalleled challenges in the enjoyment of their human rights, from the right to enjoy the enjoyment of the high standard of a highest sustainable standard of physical and mental health, to the right of an adequate standard of living, including adequate food, clothing, housing. So it is not merely an environmental issue, but it's also a question of justice. As those with the least resources, this 91%, and those who play the least role in causing climate change are compelled to face and to confront the most severe impacts of this. And it is in this context that the Holy See has denounced what it calls the ecological debt. This refers to the responsibility owed by wealthier, by industrialized countries to poorer and to developing countries, due to the overexploitation of natural resources, due to their disproportionate contribution to environmental degradation, and also due to their, say, failed attempts to assist the poorer nations. So this betrays a distorted mentality which reduces nature to a commodity to be bartered for economic or political gains. Many developing countries, home to some of the most important reserves of the biosphere, continue to fuel the advancement of richer countries at the cost of their own present and at the cost of their own future, of the future of their own generations. Special care must thus be shown to these countries in order to repay, or to at least remedy, let's say, the current ecological debt related to development imbalances with environmental repercussions. So, despite all attempts to deny, to conceal, to gloss over, or to relativize the issue, the signs of climate change are here and are inherently evident. And I was in last winter in the north of Germany, where there used to be always a lot of snow and it was incredibly hot. 2 weeks ago, I had a friend going to Sicily, which is not the coldest region in the world, and it was cold. So hope remains, but it rests on our willingness to acknowledge our common but also differentiated responsibility and to work together to address this phenomenon. In this regard, I would like to be also a bit practical and express three, what I consider that could be three key areas of action. The first is the adaptation, which was just also before mentioned by Brother Rodrigo, adaptation and mitigation supported by robust climate finance as two sides of the same coin. It is not a matter of either or. Rather, it means working together to establish a coherent framework of adaptation measures while accelerating mitigation efforts, including by taking bolder action with respect to fossil fuels without impairing the fair request of development of each country. Secondly, central to this act of balancing between adaptation and mitigation is the notion of a just transition, which ensures that the shift toward a low carbon reality considers the needs of all countries, including the provisions of adequate means of implementation. A just transition is not merely a technical adjustment. It demands respect for human dignity, and it must not compromise the enjoyment of human rights, such as the right to work, the right to social protection, and the right to education for all. And thirdly, this transition must not take place only in the external sphere. To protect our common home, it is imperative that our efforts go beyond technical solutions or simply, let's say, economic adjustments. We need a change in mindset, or better, as we say, we need, which was also evoked before, an ecological conversion. A recognition that the care for the environment is inseparable and needs a change in the lifestyle, in the production, in the consumption. We are called to recognize this and to embrace a more thoughtful and interconnected approach to people and to the world around us. So, as we approach COP30, it is important, I think, to be aware that climate change is a common threat, to whole humankind, and it is equally important not to be overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. I don't think Franciscan International consider helplessness, but nobody has to consider himself to be helpless. We rather have to face this challenge with hope, to look up, and as the etymology of the word hope, which I was recalling at the beginning, reminds us, we need to strive for a goal and eventually to work diligently to turn this hope into action. And so I just conclude by recalling another meaning of hope. Tikwa is a verb in Hebrew, because I studied sacred scripture in my youth, and so I cannot accept the idea of forgetting everything. And tikwa means to hope, but it also refers as a noun to accord, which evokes the idea of connection and the say of mutual support. So hope is always bound to one another, to another, is always bound to relationships. We cannot hope alone. The hope is never to hope alone. Just as the seed cannot grow alone, but requires fertile soil and a careful hand that waters it, we too cannot grow in isolation. And we cannot solve our common issues in solitude. As we strive for our goal, for a world where each and every person can truly flourish in full respect for her dignity and for his God-given dignity, we must also be reminded that this can only be achieved in one way. We can only achieve it together. So this is why this event is important, because we need a lot of togetherness, a lot of places where we connect. And this is why I'm happy to be with you today to participate in this event, and I encourage you to continue, because it is a shared responsibility, it is a shared work, and it is a shared action that we need to undertake both with the international organization, both in states like Brazil, who is present with us today, like with all the civil society, and of course with the Holy See as somehow the state which desire to be the voice of the helpless and to help them to draw the attention of the most developed nations in order to find and to strive and to work together for our common destiny and for our common man. So thank you very much and congratulations for the event.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. And I think also thank you very much for kind of introducing concepts which are probably not every day here at the table, like hope and linking hope to action and also to mutual reality, which is something a bit new to me. Thank you for this reflection. I think it's very helpful. And also for introducing the issue of ecological debt and framing the discussion also about responsibility. So who needs to move first? When you look at the reality out there, in light of what you just presented, and you see that governments cut global aid by 26% between 24 and 25, global aid, when you see that they do not deliver on climate finance, and you have many conversations with governments about these issues, I guess, how is this ecological debt and this northern responsibility perceived when you address which countries, northern governments as Holy See about their responsibility? The reality out there is really tough. And are you also concerned about these major aid cuts, that they will have a tremendous impact also on our climate goals?
Yeah, I'm concerned, but I am more concerned because they are not very concerned. So this is what really makes me very concerned. And because we follow mantras, and we need to be not to follow somehow in a passive way mantra. Now the mantra is si vis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, strive for war. And so this it's a catch-all word which allows and which justifies all kind of cuts. But we cannot justify all kind of cuts. We want to change. We need to be consistent with what we do. If we want peace, we must strive for democracy, for climate respect. We must strive for the respect for human dignity. And this is what really concerns me. However, I'm not hopeless. I'm not hopeless because this is the strength of the Holy See, and this is the strength of a lot of us. We are persistent and consistent, and we don't change. And there is here we have a common issue, we have a common threat, we have a global issue and a global threat, and we need to address it in a persistent, in a resilient way. And this is what I think gives me hope, because even though this problem is there to stay, and what we are saying maybe meets now some problems, some resistances, but it is a real issue. And it is an evidence that is there to stay, and that before or late it will be recognized. What we only have to try to do is that this doesn't happen too late. And this is why it's important that we keep on and we continue our action, our advocacy, our commitment, so that this issue can remain on board and can be seen in all its multifaceted challenges and dimensions.
Thank you. Allow me a second short follow-up question, coming back to the presentation of Father Rodrigo, who presented the call from the Southern Bishops' Conferences. And we saw in Laudato Si that Pope Francis made many references also in his encyclical, where he quoted also voices from the Global South, Southern Bishops' Conferences. Is there, would you agree, or do you observe a kind of increased importance of this first-hand information from the Global South, these calls from the Global South, and is the Holy See taking these perspectives also into account in its own policies?
I would say we are for sure taking it into account, because I mean, before being here, I was nuncio in the Congo, And beforehand, I was nuncio in Colombia. Before a number of COPs, there are a number of bishops going, and we are increasing the interrelationship between the delegation of the Holy See at the COPs and the delegation of bishops' conferences or Catholic organizations there. Precisely why? Because the bishop conferences generally present there are the bishops' conference of the Catholic organization from the so-called South. And rightly so, because it is the South that is the most affected. And rightly so, because, it is the devastating consequences of climate change, drought, floods, sea level rise, they affect generally those countries. And so it is absolutely necessary to be in touch, because it is, let's say, a general and a global challenge, but the Holy See, as a universal entity, a subject, should be the voice of those and provide direct and first-hand information of those who are directly affected by them. We don't have any other interest than their help and their dignity. So we can really be transparent in what they've proved, what are the challenges are that they face, to transform them and to, let's say, deliver them to on the table of those who are deciding. And so this is why I think this relationship and what is being said by this organization, Catholic Association, is extremely important.
Thank you very much, Archbishop. Now, after 3 Catholic speakers, we, I think, demonstrate that this is a multi-phase issue, like the climate crisis, and warmly welcome Elena Cedillo from the Lutheran World Federation, and we are very much curious to get your perspective on the climate crisis from a faith-based NGO perspective. Well,
thank you so much, and also thank you for your presentation. And I would like to start by saying that what gives me hope now, and I think to have this event now at the Human Rights Council, ahead of COP, having here voices from faith-based organizations discussing what should be in the climate policies gives me hope, because in the past this discussion was only about politicians and was not focused really on people needs. And I think now when we talk about climate policies centered in dignity, equity, and the protection of the most vulnerable, give me the sense of hope, that something can change. And also, I think I would like to start by saying that facing all these impacts of climate change is about protecting life of the people. It is upholding human dignity and safeguarding the earth, our common home, as my predecessor said. And also we link this with the intergenerational justice. We are always talking, when we are discussing climate policy, the future of the future generations. And any climate policies that forget this dignity, protecting life, human dignity, and safeguarding the air is incomplete. Climate action cannot be reduced to numbers, to technologies, to market mechanisms, as Rodrigo also mentioned before. Dignity and human rights must be at the foundation of the climate policies. And faith traditions remind us that life is a gift, and protecting it is a moral duty. This means that climate policies must safeguard not only civil and political rights, but also economic, social, and cultural rights. The right to food, the right to water, the right to health, the right to shelter. And it also means protecting ecosystem, forests, rivers, because when nature is destroyed, human dignity is diminished. On the other hand, I also would like to highlight that equity and justice must guide our path. No? We know that climate change is driven largely by developed countries. The poorest countries and the most vulnerable countries, the least responsible, are the ones who suffer most. No? If we are talking about justice, this is not justice. No? This is unjust. And this is unacceptable. Climate policies requires us to confront these inequalities and acknowledging the historical responsibilities of high-income nations. We have in the Paris Agreement the common but differentiated responsibilities. We also discussing a lot in the climate policies polluter pays, and now we have we are in the process of preparing the NDCs, where we are expecting that developed countries can really show their commitment to decrease carbon emissions. As a third point, I would like to highlight the protection of the vulnerable communities must be at the head of the climate policies. Women, girls, indigenous people, climate migrants, low-income communities, workers whose livelihood are at stake should be first. Climate policies need to be centered on the people's needs. No, in the climate negotiations, somehow we are talking more about climate market, about how can we are talking about how putting price to the nation, no? And I think should be this should be changed, and we should really focus on the people needs, on the most vulnerable, and we need to recognize them as an actor of change. Because when faith communities are working in vulnerable countries, supporting vulnerable populations, they also already face the impacts of climate change. We can see that many of them, they acknowledge, they can provide solutions. So I think it's not fair to see them as a victims, but we also need to see them as an actor of changes. No? And on the other side, people that are suffering the effect of climate change must be fairly compensated, respected, and empowered to shape all these climate policies. I also would like to mention that transformation, as my predecessor said, is not only technical. No? So the transformation should be moral and spiritual. No? It requires compassion and solidarity, and call us to move away from extractive and profit-driven systems towards relationships that honor the value and interconnectedness of all creatures. No? We need to be aware that we need each other. No? And this means to reframe how can we engage with each other. In practical terms, this means that policies can be shaped and should be shaped through participation. No? But vulnerable voices are not only heard, but precise. It means rejecting all solutions that harm communities to explore or exploit nature. And it means grounding our climate action in ethical principles, human dignity, equity, solidarity, and the common good. If we succeed on this, so climate policies will not only cut emissions, so climate policies will restore this relationship between people, between future generations, between us and the creation, no? And we'll recognize this interconnectedness between all creatures. So I also would like to highlight that more and more, it is important that faith voices are at the COP, are at the climate negotiations. We are facing in the last 2 years some messages from governments that are saying gas and oil are a gift from God, no? We need to exploit it. So we need to be there to face these discourses from the politicians, you know, and we need to share that, well, care for creation is solidarity is there, equity should be there, human dignity should be there, human rights should be there. So, leave it there for questions. Thank you.
So the public is coming in a minute. Maybe one follow-up question. When I'm listening to you, but also to the others, I feel this just transition issue, climate, human rights, it is complex. I mean, we talk about going beyond technocratic solutions, about people-centered human rights. Is the climate crisis not simply about keeping oil, gas, and coal in the ground? And why is it so complex?
This is a really good question, and this means that we need to shift the idea of development. No? We need to shift or to change our lifestyles. No, move from consumption to care of creation, care of nature. No, so there is now also a discussion. The UN Secretary General is presenting right now the report decisions. I would like to highlight from this report, for example, what you said that it's that around 80% of all these projects regarding to gas, oil, minerals are nearby or in the land of indigenous people of peasants. So how can we really need to think about in another way of development. So we cannot continue with the same model of production, with the same model just because we are here, no? So I also think that it's really difficult to change our mindset, no? Especially when we are prioritizing profit over people, no? Or prioritizing profit over caring nation and creation, no? So, but we are here, and this is our role to raise this to the politicians, to raise this question at the COP, at the climate negotiations, at the negotiations in COP, the Human Rights Council, no, to engage in dialogue. No? And I think faith-based organizations have this capacity to facilitate dialogue among different stakeholders, to put this on the table and to start discussing, no, what can be the solution for us. Thank you.
Thanks so much for this response. The floor is now open to everyone. I think you are very different representatives. I understand there are also some governmental representatives, if I see it correctly, Russia, Brazil, others. So I don't know exactly who's in the room, but maybe feel free to raise your voice or to make a comment or ask a question to our panel. Also alternative perspectives, or the link to human rights. We are here. It's the heart of human rights negotiations, isn't it? UNDP is hosting this event as well. So, I have many more questions myself. I can continue, but we have another, let me see, we have another 6 minutes to go. No questions?
Maybe I can ask him. The first question is based on, my name is Ricardo Espinosa. I'm a member of the Fast Action Board. I work on human rights. It has always been difficult to fight in favor of the rights of economic, social, and cultural rights. We have always prioritized the human rights as such, freedom of expression, freedom of trade union, and so on. Which kind of effort should be done for fighting in favor more in economic and social and cultural rights? Because it's the division. We say normally that it should be only one human rights pillar, but the problem has always been the division and the separation of these two kinds of rights, and among them the right to education, the right to, and nowadays the right for an environment. It's a very difficult fight among in this frame of human rights.
Thanks very much.
I would just say thank you. This is a very good note. You know, the other day I was participating in an event. Someone was saying, referring to some countries, they say, yeah, but in these countries, when they talk of human rights, their undeclared assumption is that they're talking of civil and political rights. Of course, social and economic rights are much more expensive. So it takes, and if you have rights, you have duties. If you have a right, then there is also a corresponding duty. So it is quite self-evident that I think it is more expensive, it is more complex, it is more risky for a state. And why, if you just think of all the problems that we have in having the recognition of the right to development, which is a human right. So I think it's important a cultural, first of all, somehow a cultural change. And what we have been saying here, reiteratedly today, somehow a conversion, but a style conversion, a conversion of human lives, of style, and a conversion of our mindset, change in that sense. So it's a cultural issue that has to be brought, and it takes time because everything which is cultural is lengthy, it is complex, but it is worth pursuing it because only when there will be a widespread culture which recognizes this dimension and this right, it will be easier, and then afterwards to follow in the, let's say, juridic setting and in the international context.
I completely agree. I think this is a big challenge, because this means also, as you said, expenses. But I think there is another element that is important when we talk about development, because this is what in many countries the governments are facing. I'm going to give one example in the area that I am really involved with, which is mining. When in Latin America, after the period of the military regimes and all the openings, etc., and then we start to have more popular democratic governments, it came out an idea that the resources we have, we would call common goods, are important and we need them. So to extract them, and it will be possible with the extraction of these resources to pay the social, political, public policies. But for what kind of development? And then the first thing was, this was called new extractivism by some scholars in Latin America, and it was at that time of the consensus of the commodities. Remember? And so, okay, we, from the taxation, from let's say, even this is a huge other discussion, we're gonna pay the expenses for health, education, etc. This was the case of Brazil many years ago when the pre-salt oil, this is all go for health and for education. See, came out two big issues. First of all, what for? When you talk now about extracting critical minerals or rare earth for the so-called technologies that will go for windmills and for the solar panels, that way, the first one is it with which expenses? okay? It means impacts on the ground. Mining, there's no just mining, there's no sustainable mining up to now. We know this, especially because what determines the fluxes and the intensity of mine depends on the markets and on the investors. But for what time? Let's see, man, they're talking about about EVs. What means EVs? Why are not discussing transportation? Are we going to continue with this model of transportation? Of course, we need transportation. And if some part of this transportation can be through this type, okay, but this type has impacts because to collect, distribute, and storage, you will need those minerals. So, but this is to continue the same type of system, and the finish, that is for concentration of wealthy, consumerism, and a very anthropocentric way of looking. So I think we need to replace, because when we talk about development, we already have some things set on our mind in terms of what we consider the gross product and all these things. So I think nowadays we need to target a lot the rights of the nature.
Thanks very much. The last word for today goes to Ellen.
Thank you. Just very briefly, a message to not give up. In the climate negotiations, you will listen more and more that we already reached the 1.5 degree. So we should pursue the 2 degrees, but still there is time to not to decrease our emissions, to be under or below 1.5 degrees, to protect nature, to protect the ecosystem, to protect the biodiversity, and also to protect our own life. You know? So I think we should continue advocating for a strong NDCs, a strong commitment of decreased carbon emissions, while human rights, human dignity, and the people needs be at the center of these policies. No, that's it.
I think it's fantastic closing of the session. Thanks for this coming back also to the climate policies and framing. I don't know, organizers, is there anything to be said? Or can I just say thank you? Thank you for joining us, Archbishop, Rodrigo, Elena, everybody. Have a good rest of the day.
And maybe announce the next event.
And also thanks to everybody online who followed us. And the next event I leave to you.
It's at 1 p.m. in room Concordia 1, where we are discussing with Francisca's International Just Transition, linking also to what is ongoing now at the Human Rights Council, the presentation of the report on Just Transition.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, please.